assembled today what we think is an excellent cross-section of veterans of D-Day and the son of one of the leading generals in our history. Unfortunately, Major General Al Smith, who is on the program, is not with us. His wife is seriously ill, and the general is doing his duty, and he's by her side. Fortunately, however, we were able to locate in Hoxie, Kansas, Sir Stan Winter, Company Commander, C Company, 16th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division, Omaha Beach, 1st Assault D-Day. We're glad you came with us. We also have a person who will deliver a few remarks on behalf of General Smith. He'll be introduced by Steve Ambrose just shortly. Before we begin the formal part of the presentation with Dr. Ambrose, I'm going to do a few brief introductions, and if I could have my very faithful audiovisual staff over here lower the lights a little. The people on the stage may want to turn and look at themselves 50 years ago. Maybe they won't want to turn and look. They called him Monty. That is not Lord Montgomery, who's on the stage 50 years ago. But he's a very distinguished father, and we're very pleased to have with us Lord Montgomery. Would you give him a welcome, please? "50 years ago, over England, the skies were often blackened by the bombers heading for Europe. This young, dashing officer was Colonel Bob Vickers. Colonel, we're very pleased to have you with us. I'm going to introduce him anyway. He's out being interviewed. Urban Rommel was his mentor. He trained this officer well, and you can tell by the war-weary look on his face, there have been many struggles for him. Colonel Von Luck is with us. He will be here shortly. He probably doesn't want to, he looks totally different today, you know, when you look at him. Most of them do. Major General Peter Martin's career could be a British Army highlight film if you read his biography in the program. In 1944, he was this dashing young officer, and we're very pleased, still a dashing gentleman today. We're pleased to have you with us, General Martin. Major John Howard in battle dress, 1944. Major, it's an honor to have you here. And he is the only one that we're showing a recent photograph of. When he sent me his photograph of 50 years ago, he also included this, which was taken last year at Pegasus Bridge. The gentleman standing to his left was a German sentry on the night that he attacked the bridge. And they're very good friends. If you look closely, this is Sword Beach D-Day. If you look at the figure in your right, you can see the ends of the bagpipes. That is Piper Bill Millen. If you look closely in the water to the right of the column, that's Lord Lovat. And of course, we all recognize this photograph as one of the most famous or well-known of World War II. Wally, that concludes these brief introductions. I welcome you all here. I'm going to turn the microphone over to a man who knows decidedly more than I do about World War II, Eisenhower, D-Day, and practically anything. It's an honor to introduce to you Dr. Stephen Ambrose.
Thanks very much. My role here is as moderator. If you want to hear from the men of D-Day, and I am not going to take any of their time. I'm going to ask each of them to try their best to hold it down to 3, 4, or 5 minutes, which I know how hard it is, but these people all have a lot of questions they're going to want to ask of you. So we'll proceed, starting with the youngest man who is up here. He didn't get into the British Army until 1946. So he is the only member of this panel who did not participate in D-Day in the sense of going ashore, but he certainly had a lot of experiences around D-Day, and that is Viscount Montgomery, the son of the Field Marshal, who has asked me to plug his book, which is coming out in a couple of weeks, that he has done with Alistair Horn, one of the great historians of the Second World War. The title is Monty, the Lonely Leader. Lovely title. Viscount Montgomery.
Thank you, Steve. I feel a bit of a fraud here because I'm sitting with 6 distinguished veterans, and I was at school. When I said to Dan Holt, what do you want me to do? Because I haven't got any experience of D-Day, which would be relevant to this sort of audience. He said, I think you better talk about Monty and Ike. This was the day before yesterday. Now, Monty and Ike, in a few minutes, in this shrine of Eisenhower, is a bit of a hard task at any time. And of course, my father was famous for his non-diplomatic skills. I'm going to pass out, but I just think it would be worth saying that they did have of course, it would be foolish to suppose they didn't disagree. But the disagreement came later. And the disagreement is not the subject of this conference. The disagreement came in the strategy to be adopted after the conclusion of the Battle of Normandy. But in the period that we're considering, that is the run-up to D-Day, from the first half of 1944, there was total agreement. It was a great team. And in fact, I consider, and many historians I think agree, that it probably was the zenith of the special relationship between Britain and America. Everything was very harmonious at all times. We have always continued, I hope, and must continue to have a special relationship, but it was at its peak during the first half of 1944.
David, could you lean into the microphone?
Right. Anybody not here at the back? Unfortunately, they can go to sleep. So let me just explain 1 or 2 facts about this relationship. Perhaps the relationship started to form itself in 1943, when, and in fact before, when they first met. But it started really from 1943 onwards, when Monty, and I think it's probably easier to refer to him as that, first saw Eisenhower in action, of course, in Operation Torch. And Operation Torch, I think, wasn't a huge success, and so he began to wonder about this guy as to whether he was really a great general or whether he was a great politician. And I think he formed the view that he was probably more of the latter. He did this by visiting a number of units with his staff and ADCs and collecting them around him and asking them, amongst other things, he wanted them to see him, because in the whole of his military experience, and especially in World War I, he had never seen a general at close hand. Now, I think he saw nearly everybody, although Wallace Strobel was just telling me that they didn't meet, so he must have been one of the exceptions who got away. But on the whole, he did. And one of the questions he used to say to the soldiers, "Soldier, what is your most valuable possession?" And the answer invariably was, "General, my rifle." To which he replied, "No, it is your life, and I am going to try and look after that to the best of my ability." This was his maxim for war, that you had to win with the minimum amount of casualties. He was very concerned with the soldiers under his command. It is for that reason that he became very much a soldier's general rather than a general's general. he had disagreements with generals, but not with soldiers who respected what he was trying to do. And thus it was that he continued around the country visiting troops and indeed visiting factories. So much so that the British politicians at the time got rather concerned about this. They thought that the war might end, and here was a man who might try to take power. They didn't really understand the man, obviously, because the last thing he was interested in politics, he thought all politicians were rather devious and to be avoided. But it gave rise to quite an interesting incident, because Churchill one day was talking to the King George VI, and said, "I'm a bit worried about Monty. I think he's after my job." To which the King replied, "Gosh, that's a great relief. I thought he was after mine." Neither was, of course, correct. So it was that we come to this amazing action that took place. And I think that the last thing I'd like to say is the reference to the conference at Southwark House, where the decision was made, the fateful decision made on the night, early in the morning of the 5th of June, after one day's postponement. And you are all aware that I asked people what they thought should happen, whether they should go or not go. And it's very interesting that the division of these 6 commanders who were in front of him, these 6 generals, was that the air and the sea commanders thought that it perhaps should be postponed. They thought it was chancy. But it was the ground force commanders, led by Monty, with Bradley and Beadle Smith, who said, "We must go." And I, being a soldier, I think, without, I don't know, Stephen Ambrose, this was decided, is now not quite sure whether it took 5 seconds or 5 minutes, but whatever time it took, he supported the soldiers, because he knew that they were going to be the people who were going to face the odds. And I think that that really sums it up, because finally it was Beadle Smith who actually did recognize that Monty had something to contribute, because he said, without Monty, we couldn't have done it. It was his sort of thing. He got us there. Thank God he did. Thank you.
Is Major John Howard, who is perhaps the most famous of all the D-Day veterans, because he went in first. His company was the first to go into action as an organized unit, coming down by glider very shortly after midnight on the 6th of June of 1944 to capture in a coup de main operation Pegasus Bridge. And John's name is forever associated with that great action, Major John Howard.
Thank you, Steve. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to the Longest Day film, which was made in 1961, over 30 years ago, and a public relation officer I have acquired on the way, named Stephen Ambrose. I don't have to tell you much about the story. Many of you have read his book, which is under the heading of Thrillers, and you will know all the details. So I'll just go through a few questions that are normally asked of me when I do run. And the first one is, it's so straightforward, you wouldn't think people ask it, were you scared? Well, I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, going into battle in what we all called wooden coffins, landing at night behind the enemy lines, of course we were scared, and only fools and liars would say otherwise. But at that time it was tempered by our desire to get a job done. We were all, and when I say all, I'm talking about all the Allied troops, were fed up with that war. All we wanted to do to get across the Channel and to rid Europe of the Nazi regime. and the sooner the better. And the fact that we've been given the primary job of capturing the first targets added to that. So we forgot our scare. We were just wanted to get that job done and get back to our wives and children. They bring champagne out, and right on the dot of 16 minutes after midnight, when number glider landed, we just toast our fallen comrades. And may I just finish on two sounds that are brought out in this Sonnet Lumiere I've just told you about. One was the success signal given out by the radio when we knew both bridges captured intact. And this was given out 15 minutes after the first glider landed. There were code words: ham for Pegasus Bridge and jam for the River Bridge, because we had two bridges to capture a quarter mile apart. And my radio operator, I could hear him now. Hello, poor dog, that's our call sign. Ham and jam, ham and jam. And he got so excited I distinctly heard him say, ham and bloody jam! Now, I never did find out who picked it up. It should have been Brigadier Posh, who died as General Sir Nigel died not very long ago. But he lost his radio on landing. He dropped and landed at the same time as we did with the independent para. The other sound was a stirring sound that I agreed with the commanding officer of 7th Para, the para battalion that were first to reach us that night. They didn't get to us till 3 o'clock, but I'd arranged that as soon as they dropped, which is exactly half an hour after we landed, 10 to 1 to be precise, so 50 hours, we heard all these bombers coming over, and I'd arranged with him that 5 minutes after the landing, I would blow Victory V on a very loud P whistle I had. And this is the sound that went out of the air. And to this day, Paras come up to me and say, "Sir, that was a wonderful sound. It not only told us the bridges were captured intact, but it also gave us direction," which to a para landing in the middle of the night, as you Paras present will know, the thing you want to know is direction and where you are. You just said the bridges are that way, so my rendezvous must be that way. And this is the sound they heard. This is the very whistle. I've been offered thousands of French by French museums of this. And this is the whistle. So stand back, cameras. Victory V.
I want to tell a brief story. I had been getting a lot of calls, and the television people want to know who's got a good story and where are they. And I told NBC television that, well, Michael Foote is the guy who dreamed up those dummy paratroopers and the gramophones that so confused the Germans and had an incredible payoff in terms of a very little investment on the side of the Allies, a very big reward. And I said, so get Michael Foote to tell you about those dummy paratroopers. He thought it up and he organized the thing. They called me back and they said, "Are you sure you got the name right?" I said, "Yeah, of course I got the name right." They said, "No, it can't be. He never heard of Rupert." And I said, "Well, that's because Darrell Zanuck invented that name, Rupert." And they finally got it straightened around. Michael, would you stand up so they can take a look at you? Next speaker is Major General Peter Martin, and his biography is in your program, and I won't take time to call it out to you, except to say that on D-Day he landed at Gold Beach.
Now that I know, ladies and gentlemen, how long 3 to 5 minutes is. As you all know, I'm sure, the Victoria Cross is the highest award for valour, for courage in battle that the British Army or British services have. And not very long ago, a Canadian holder of the VC died, and in the obituary columns of the newspaper it reported that he was once asked, what quality would you expect to find in a man who was likely to win the Victoria Cross? And he paused a moment and said, well, I can answer that in one word: inexperience. Now, the division to which I belonged, the 50th Division, was a very experienced division. We had started the war in France. We had gone up to the Belgian border and into Belgium when the Germans invaded Belgium and France. And we'd come off at Dunkirk, which was very undignified. And from there we had gone out to the Middle East. We had gone up into the Western Desert after one or two other preliminary moves. We had been chased all the way across half the desert by ants here and the 21st Panzer Division. We were then told that our lightning dash to visit the cars was off. Now, I've talked to Hans about this. What would have happened if we had gone ahead? Because there was, as far as I could see, nothing at that stage to stop us. When we did try launch our lightning dash 36 hours later, we hadn't got very far before we hit the Panzer Division, which at the time, on the night of D-Day, on the evening of D-Day, wasn't in the area and could only move towards the bridgehead by night. So my guess is that if we had exploited the success we had that first day, we could have got inland 20 miles to visit the cars. But whether we would have ever have stayed there once we got there is another matter, because that would have depended on the build-up behind, the weather, the ammunition supply, and so on. But it's an interesting thing to think of. Ladies and gentlemen, there's one last thing I'd say. You are hearing stories from people who were there. When I was interviewed by somebody from the Imperial War Museum who was doing tapes of stories by old soldiers, I said to him, he told me he'd had a fascinating time, and I said, do you believe everything you are told? He said, of course. I said, well, just remember what Shakespeare said in that speech by Henry V before the Battle of Agincourt, in which he said, old men forget, yet all should be forgot, but they'll remember with advantages what feats they did that day. Certainly, one's memories improve as the years go by.
One brief comment. I love the LCI and the American crew carrying in the British 50th Division, and it was British coxswains and LCAs that carried in the Rangers to Point to Hoe. It's a wonderful example of this marvelous unity that we had in 1944. Our next speaker is Lieutenant Wallace Strobel with the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne.
I was going to just speak off the cuff, so to speak, but in order to follow the timing, which I find is a little difficult, I'm going to read a time remark paper that I have, and I hope you don't mind, because you can ask questions after, as I understand it. Can you hear everybody? You know, I find it very ironic that I'm here today with such distinguished guests. On June the 5th, as a young parachute infantry platoon leader, I came face to face with General Eisenhower. That June the 5th was my 22nd birthday. What a birthday party, huh? And what a guest. General Eisenhower, having made the decision for the invasion of Europe, had come to see his airborne troops off. As he entered our area, he stopped and asked me my name and where I was from. And I replied, Strobel, sir, Michigan. With that, he smiled warmly, said, ah, yes, Michigan. I fished there many times. Great fishing. I said, yes, sir. He said, well, are you well briefed? And are your men ready? I said, yes, sir. They're very well briefed and we're really ready to go. With that, he said, good. He moved on. That happened, and the picture was taken at that particular time. I hadn't realized that the photos had been taken until several weeks later when I saw a picture in the pony edition of Time magazine and recognized the number 23 on my chest. That number 23 was my plane number and identified the plane that we went over on. Because of that photo, I find myself here today, for no other reason. Regarding the readiness question, you must understand the nature and the esprit of the parachute soldier. These were not ordinary men. They were all, each and every one of them, volunteers, trained to depend on each other as no other Army unit at that time. If you're going to fight a war, these are the kind of men to fight it with. Were they ready to go? Yes. Were they really ready to fight? You bet they were. And were they well briefed? Because of security, we've been restricted to a heavily guarded tent area for several days. And there we were told for the first time when and where our missions would be. We had very accurate sand table replicas of the areas of our objectives. We were provided with detailed maps of the beach area and the area behind the beaches. And the jump masters were provided with maps depicting what our jump zones would look like at night from a plane door. Yes, we were exceptionally well briefed. One question I ask is, how did it feel to step out of a plane in the dark over a strange, heavily fortified country? I think most of the troopers would agree when I say wonderful. The planes flew through patches of fog, and we had heavy ground fire against the planes. And that made formation flying very, very difficult. The C-47s were taking evasive action, back and forth, and they were throwing all of them in around because we were standing at that particular point, and the men, as you know, were heavily weighed down with equipment. With all of the equipment we carried, I think most of the men felt anything was better and safer than staying in that plane. You know, I did. It was a real relief when the green light went on and I shouted, let's go, and let our jump stick out of the door. I had the misfortune of landing in a tree. And hanging in a tree with small arms fire that sent those chilling zip sounds in your ear was quite another matter. With a parachute harness pushing up against my arms, I couldn't reach the release mechanism, which was on the chest at that time. You had to turn it and get it. I removed a knife from the knife pocket on the edge of my jacket, so I was able to cut the riser straps and drop to the ground. After that, it was a matter of pulling as many men together as possible and heading for our objective. Our objective, by the way, had been 4 heavy guns about 4 or 5 kilometers from the beach and overlooked the beach. My group finally consisted of about 25 men. And after verifying our location from a French farmer, we headed in the general direction of our objective, which we judged to be about 7 or 8 kilometers away. We had been dropped that far off our drum zone. We moved toward our objective through continual firefights. In spite of our efforts to circle around these small centers of resistance, we lost several men. Finally, late that afternoon, we arrived at our objective to find our battalion commander sitting on the gun emplacement ruins that had been knocked out by the Air Force apparently a day or two before. He asked me, where the hell have you been? I said, Colonel, we were dropped way off the drop zone, and we've been fighting like hell ever since to get here. And he said, okay, Stroke, well, that's what's happened to the whole damn battalion. He said, go over and get some sleep. Around midnight, I was told to report to that battalion commander. The colonel said that 506th would attack the next day, and the phone line from division to the 506 CT had been cut. Division had radio contact, but General Taylor wanted the phone back in service before the attack. Colonel Chapuis told me to send out a patrol with a signalman and jeep and repair the break. I volunteered to lead the patrol, and he approved. We found the break. Our division had phone contact in time, and the completion of that patrol ended my part of D-Day. The next day, most of the battalion had gathered, and we were reassigned to a defensive line along the river until the attack on Carentan, which was on June 8th and 9th and 10th. Throughout the invasion and the balance of the war, there were many other events, but to this day, I've never had a bigger and more exciting birthday. I think I'm within the time schedule.
Now we turn to the other side of the hill, and we're going to hear from the commander of the 125th Regiment of the 21st Panzer Division, and the author of a book entitled Panzer Commander, Colonel Hans von Luck.
I think I also have 5 to 6 minutes to speak, so I have to concentrate. But half a minute I use to thank on behalf of all veterans and all guest speakers, our thanks to Mr. Dan Holt, who made such good organization and was so hospitality with his whole staff. And thank you, Dan Holt. Well, I belonged to the 21st Panzer Division, North Africa. You heard about that and chasing back and forth. And I left North Africa just before the end, before the capitulation of about 200,000 Germans, plus the Italians, with a special mission to meet Hitler and give him an envelope with a plan to try a German Dunkirk. And I said to the General Oberst from Arnhem, Rommel was a little bit sick and he was at home. I am a simple major, and what I have to do with Hitler, I don't like to go there. Yeah, Hitler doesn't trust anymore his generals, and so you shouldn't shave and you shouldn't brush your uniform. Dirty as you are, unshaved, so that's what you like. And so with the signature of Kesselring in the military say, and signature of the personal chief, I arrived at Berchtesgaden with my big envelope, unshaved. And I met a very nice friend of mine who was in North Africa as well, and he said, "What the hell are you doing here? I think you're in Africa." I said, "Yes, but I have a special mission. We wanted German Dunkirk, and I want to see Jodl and Keitel, and then I have to see Hitler. I never saw him before." So he said, my friend said to me, "Jolly good idea, but now it's lunchtime." The night of 5th to 6th, I heard the bombardment, you heard about that already, on the Atlantic Wall and mainly on Caen. And then I got the first message, paratroopers are dropping down. And unfortunately, my 5th company was out for night exercise with dummy ammunition. And just on their position, the pilot dropped out. And the CEO of the company said, "Can you help me?" I said, "Okay." So I ordered 2 companies to find this other company into their position, what was absolutely against the general order. It had not to move. And there were the first prisoners. We were always fair, the British were always fair. I mostly fought against the British. And so they were the first prisoner was the doctor of the 6th Airborne. And he was very upset to be the first prisoner in his first mission in Normandy. So I asked him what's going on, and following the Geneva Convention, he just gave me his number. Oh, let's make a deal. So I said to him, "Listen, Lieutenant, what do you think about exchanging you against cigarettes?" And he said, "Very good idea." I said, "How many cigarettes are you worth?" And he said, 1 million cigarettes, that is 100,000 hectoliters. Okay. And so at 5:05, we normally open our wireless for exchange. So at 5:05, I contacted the Royal Coast. "We got your lieutenant's message. Germany, and here's a proposal. Hold on, they came back, and after a short time, they came back. We are awfully sorry, we are as well a little short of spirit. All we can offer are 650,000. Everybody around me was, okay, okay. I accepted, but I could have left the shoes, not one cigarette below 1 million. So I had to send it to prison. Thank you very much.
Before we turn to the view from above, I'm going to make a political comment. The politics of memory are difficult. I'm sure you're all aware that President Mitterrand has made it very public that he does not want Chancellor Kohl in France on the 6th of June. I would like to remind all of us here that on the 12th day of January of 1951, Abilene's most famous son returned to the continent of Europe to take up his duties as the first supreme commander of the NATO forces. And when he arrived in Germany, he said this: "When I was last here, 5.5 years ago, I bore in my heart a very definite hatred for the Germans and especially for the Nazis and all they stood for. But I want to say here today, for my part, let bygones be bygones. I believe in the essential freedom-loving quality of the great German people." And he said the success of this operation will have to be judged 50 years from now. And if 50 years from now Germany has a flourishing democracy, then we will have been successful. Germany has been our partner and our ally for 45 years now. The Germans have been a leading member of the greatest alliance the world has ever known, the alliance of freedom-loving democracies. And so I would like to echo General Eisenhower's words and say, for my part, let bygones be bygones. And now we look on this magnificent scene from above. Colonel Robert Vickers piloted D-24 Liberators for the 8th Air Force, the 392nd Bomb Group. He flew 3 missions on D-Day. Colonel Vickers.
Everybody here okay? Now that I know what 3 to 5 minutes are, I threw my notes away. So bear with me. I have to echo Colonel Von Luke's comments with regard to gratitude to Director Dan Holt, President Morse, the General Eisenhower family, and certainly Dr. Ambrose for being here. I'm sort of feeling like an Airedale. That's what the Army guys called us a long time ago when we were in the Air Corps. So I feel very distinguished to be here and in this noble group. Representing 350,000 plus men and women who served in what historians later have aptly called the Mighty Eighth. And they've also accredited the 8th Air Force with being the largest combat air striking force which has been ever assembled then and now. Reminds me, sitting here, and I thought you'll have sympathy with me, of something that Mark Twain once said. I guess it was one of his first speeches. Most of us know he was a great American humorist, and that's something I'm not, so I don't put myself in his category. But he got up on the stage, probably to relieve his own tension and get the audience with him. He said something like this: Alexander the Great's dead, Julius Caesar's dead, Napoleon's dead, so did George Washington, and right now I don't feel so good myself. Well, anyway, I'm okay, and I'd just like to press on here with comments briefly. Beginning, Director Holt asked me to comment on about 5 areas. I'll leave some of those out to the question and answer period, but I'll forthwith tell you what they were. One, relate my personal experiences in the air operations, and that I assure you will take about 10 seconds. I'll leave this open to you all. Secondly, how the 8th Air Force, the Bomber Command, Fighter Command assisted the D-Day operation. Again, I'll leave a lot of the comments to that, but I would like to dwell on that momentarily. And certainly the profound assistance and backup of the air leaders that General Eisenhower gave him in the air battle over the Third Reich. Lastly, my reflections on 50 years, and possibly some comments on the Operation Cobra, which was the breakout at St. Lo, where we provided the close air support bombing. And again, I would like to defer to that in the interest of time, Dr. Ambrose. The preacher said before us on Mother's Day, as he introduced his sermon, big subject, little time. And I assure you, I won't preach to you, and I'll try to keep it brief. What was this 8th Air Force? I must say this, that when I speak of the 8th Air Force, I speak of the RAF, who are our big brother. We had rough times over there, at least I didn't, I wasn't over there early, at the very beginning. Had we not have our RAF brothers and their guidance, I don't know what the infant 8th would have done. The 8th was born right after Pearl Harbor. Winston Churchill, Roosevelt, key chiefs there, Arcadia Conference, and they suddenly realized profoundly that they had to defeat one of the most formidable adversaries that we were facing, the German Air Force. And that had to be done before the invasion. There was no question about it. General Aker then, with the 8th small outfit, went to England and began a real trudge to try to make this lusty infant grow into something that was meaningful. 1942, rough years. The Luftwaffe massacred us. Beginning of 1943, something had to be done. The RAF was going by night against the Third Reich. We were going with daylight precision bombing. Our tactical doctrine, daylight precision bombing. A lot of people didn't know much about this, but our air leaders felt confident. Ultimately, it proved the answer. As I'll tell you a moment about an interview I had with Air Speer, Albert Speer, later in Heidelberg, to where his comments reflected this. The conference in Casablanca in 1943, Winston Churchill apparently picked up on the idea of round-the-clock bombing. He liked that term. And the combined chiefs got together and made an ops plan called Point Blank. Point Blank was a combined bomber operations. It had 10 target priorities, focused RAF, 8th Air Force. The first being the aircraft industry, second ball bearing, third the German oil, and ironically 9, the transportation system, which later General Eisenhower had it moved up in the priority. As you all know, that probably became the second Achilles heel of the Third Reich, along with the oil. 1943, bad years. Bomber force building up, not too many fighters. One major problem, we did not have a long-range escort fighter. We could not get the bombers much beyond the western frontier of Germany to go into deep targets like Berlin, Magdeburg, the oil, and all the other key targets. We got clobbered. High losses. Luftwaffe, very, very active. Certainly wasn't dead. At Schweinfurt, August 1943, October 43, 500 plus B-17s went in there and 96 were lost. That's 20% loss rate. Unacceptable. We had good fighters, the P-47 Thunderbolt. We had the Spitfires. We had the P-38 Lightning, but they had short legs in the Air Force tolerance. They could go about to the Rhine River, and that was it. Not enough. Suddenly there was a lull in the 8th Air Force. Even the Germans noticed it. General Galland, in his wisdom and later in his writings, acknowledged this. And I will say this, pausing for a moment. I've had a personal experience, not to use the term I, which I dislike, to have interviewed, as I say, Reich Minister Albert Speer at Heidelberg in '75, who confirmed a lot of the later observations of how the 8th did their job. And one of the things he said was he was most concerned with daylight precision bombing above all. And after Schweinfurt, he mentioned if we had struck them again, struck the German armaments industry, like we hit the ball bearing works, a great loss, that probably in 2 weeks it would have been weakened, and I was 2 months, and 4 months, it might have been brought completely to a standstill. But that was not to be. There were things in the wing. What it was that airplane you saw flying over this morning. Probably to the Air Force, probably at that time the world's greatest fighter airplane, the North American P-51 Mustang. That was the answer. Some other things happened right in the first part of 1943. General Doolittle came in as the 8th Air Force commander. General Aker moved to the higher level of the Allied command of 2 air forces in the Mediterranean, the 15th and the 12th. And now we had 4 air forces on the flank of Germany, and they started to pay off. Really, that was the second front, the air war. We were delighted when the third front came, as we called it, because we knew our ground forces were going aboard. The Mustang came on the scene. General Doolittle went down to General Kepner's headquarters at Fighter Command, and this is about what evolved. I think the history books show it. He saw a sign on the wall, and it said, "The first duty of the American fighter is to protect the bombers." General Doolittle, not known for profanity, I know, because I know the man, he said, "Damn it, take that sign down and change it to read, the first duty of the American fighter is to seek out and destroy the German fighter." And General Kepner says, "Sir, are you authorizing me to do that?" He says, "No, I'm directing you to do it." They turned the 51 loose, and General Galland brings this out in his book, First and the Last, and it was a proper decision. They went on the offensive, which fighter planes should do, and he said they took the air war to us from the top of the clouds to the top of the trees. The 51, arguably, no question, in all flight regimes, low level and high, was better than the top line German fighters at the time, the Focke-Wulf 190 and the ME 109. It started to pay off. It cleared the bomber sectors. We could go in. It could take us deep into targets. It could fight, and it did. In February 1943, the weather cleared. We got back after the German oil, transportation, the German aircraft industry, and also hit some what they call no-ball sites. Those were the buzz bombs on the coast of France. Something was up. We knew it was. But by May to June, General Galland says they had cut the supplies of the Luftwaffe by 70%. D-Day and the Luftwaffe. The gallant German forces on the ground were saying, "Where is the Luftwaffe?" The Luftwaffe was a no-show. Air support had been gained. And that's exactly what our air chiefs were certainly concerned about, but it paid off. 2 daylight sorties over the beaches early in the morning. That was about what the Luftwaffe had. After that, General Eisenhower turned the loose on the transportation oil again. Air supremacy, which means over all of Central Europe, was gained late fall. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. As I perceived it as bomber pilot and later as just an avid student of the 8th Air Force in Hood. Turning briefly to experiences, I'll talk to the young crews. When I say young, we went over, we knew what we were there for, our commanders told us, and we know why we were there. Young, yes. My crew was 19 3/4 years old. I was the old man pilot at 20, and I just turned up before D-Day. They came dedicated, there's no question, no Hollywood types. They came afraid, but they knew their job. They had confidence in their mission, their airplanes, which are state-of-the-art, their commanders certainly, and certainly the mission. I don't have the time to take you on a combat mission. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I'll tell you one thing, there's no Hollywood heroes in it. Some of this stuff you see on TV is just hogwash. The gut-wrenching was there all the time. From the takeoffs to the flak, it's so thick you could walk on it and taxi an airplane if you had to. Always afraid the Luftwaffe was going to jump you, but thank God for the 51. The 8th Air Force flew over 500,000 sorties, 500,000 bomber and fighter. They lost 50,000 casualties, over. They lost over 26,000 men killed in action. And to give you a comparison, that is 1 in 10 of every American was killed in World War II. It was 1 in 5 of every American killed in Europe. They had 28,000 prisoners taken. That was a mighty 8. As I reflect back, we all get a bit of sentimentality, and I will tell you, the comradeship and the bondships we feel when we meet at reunions with men you never knew, but you were all going the same way with the same mission, is overwhelming. It's indelibly etched. And I'll say another thing to track with Dr. Ambrose. The feeling we have for men who are our valiant adversaries is equally indelibly etched to us, and we're delighted to talk to them and see them every time. I just hope that you historians have done a beautiful job. It seems the lessons that are being learned aren't being learned by 3rd and 4th generation children. That is a shame. We know the U.S., Germany, and other key allies, and I don't want to make a statement. I feel real strong about this, and I'll take about one more second. I hope that they never put their blinders on and forget these lessons and let our national readiness postures, our national resolve, ever forget those lessons. because historians have told us time and again, those who forget the lessons of history, as we know, are destined to relive them. Thank you.
On the first wave, reportedly 35,000 men came ashore here in the 1st Infantry Division, the 26th Infantry, and the 90th. You're looking due north, and of course this is a paciful day compared to what they faced. Rommel had stuck a steel post clear out through this whole waterway, and it was supposed to be concealed at high tide where our landing craft would run into it. Fortunately, we landed at low tide and they were exposed. This beach is probably about 10 or 15 miles long from left to right. On the right, it joins with the British landing force at Gold. Way off in the distance to the left, which would be west, and sort of out of range of the camera, is the cliffs where the 2nd Ranger Battalion made their famous assault of the German gun battery at Point du Hoc. We're standing right here on the edge of Point du Hoc and almost 250-foot vertical cliffs that the 2nd U.S. Ranger Battalion had to scale with grappling hooks. Not all the 225 men that attacked this German gun emplacement landed here. Some landed on down the beach because the landing craft landed them in the wrong rendezvous. But it's my understanding about 125 men got up here. And but some were landed on up the beach here a ways, and they finally made their way back here. But it was hand over hand, grappling hooks, Germans throwing debris down on them and grenades. But these men made this fortification only to find that there was no gun here, but nonetheless very stiff German resistance. A very, very critical place, which commanded the Utah Beach, which is around that bend up there. So you can see, had there been a gun here, which Rommel wanted to put in, obviously this would have been a very, very, very critical gun position. But we're standing here at the famous Pegasus Bridge, which early in the morning of June the 6th, the British 6th Airborne air-landed 6 gliders in here with 30 men each to capture this important bridge across the Caen Canal, and also one a little bit further east of here across the Orne River to permit, or at least deny, the German 21st Panzer Division access to the British beaches across the canal and across the river here. Okay, this is a new bridge replacing the old one, which was mostly wooden, and it's almost an exact replica of the original Pegasus Bridge, which was a drawbridge, or it was a bridge which opened up to permit the canal boats to go through. So what you're looking at is truly a 1990-plus replica of the old bridge. They had to rush across the canal. And of course, the family over here in this cafe, the Normandy Cafe, were actually pro allies, and they were definitely informative as far as giving the British airborne folks information where the German forces were here in the local area. They took the bridge with a minimum amount of casualties. I think they only lost 3 men in this airborne. It's probably one of the most daring raids that ever been pulled off, and one of the most strategic raids, because it denied German access across these canals, which otherwise would have threatened the beach. On the morning of D-Day, about 1:30 in the morning, 2 major airborne divisions, the 82nd and 101st Airborne, dropped in here to secure this town. This town was, as you and I talked about, was the first American captured French village. And
actually, they should have dropped outside of the village.
yes, the 82nd dropped right in here. This was their objective, but they dropped into town proper. There were German fire all around here. In fact, in the steeple up here is the historic symbology of the young paratrooper Private Steele. That's
Steele.
Right. They got his parachute caught in there, and in fact, they represent now with their actual dummy. And he's hung there for hours, wounded, and watched all the carnage going on below until the 82nd captured the village. He's still alive.
And then came Bastogne. The great German offensive began to take shape in the Ardennes. To break it would require the coordination of a number of major counter-moves. Third Army signalmen set out to build a vast new communications network using some 20,000 miles of field wire. Wireless transmissions were extended outward over hundreds of miles to keep up with this desperate rescue. The radio call sign for General Patton? Lucky. Forward. Patton's troops finally relieved the besieged town, and the sweep across France, Belgium, and Holland to the German border went into its final phase.
Well, we're right in the middle of Bastogne, the memorial to the great stand here by General McAuliffe, 101st Airborne Division, Screaming Eagles. Von Rundstedt, the German commander, started a big offensive of the Germans to try to drive a wedge between the U.S. and the British forces and isolate the port of Antwerp. And about the 16th of December 1944 was the last big offensive of the Germans. At any rate, the Battle of the Bulge ensued. It was relieved here on the 26th of December by the 4th Armored Division, but also Patton came up through here from Metz and Luxembourg and finally put the finishing touches on the von Rundstedt attack. And this general here, McAuliffe, reportedly said to the Germans when they were trying to have him surrender, he said, "Nuts." And the Germans thought he said, "Go to hell," but anyway, he didn't surrender.
He meant it.
He meant it.